Picture this, Albert Einstein, the wild hair, the calm eyes, that famous face the entire world trusts. To millions, he isn't just a scientist, he's a symbol, a myth. The man who bent time, rewrote space, and gave humanity a new universe. But here's the question nobody dares to ask. What if the greatest genius of the modern world wasn't great in his private life? What if the legend had shadows? Because history has a strange rule. The bigger someone becomes, the more we want to believe they were perfect. Einstein became more than human. He became the mind of humanity. But then, decades passed, and something dangerous survived. Not a theory, not a formula. Letters, private letters, written by Einstein himself. Not for the public, not for history books, not for admirers. And when those letters were studied, people froze. Because the words inside didn't sound like the saint-like genius they imagined. They sounded cold. They sounded controlling. They sounded like a man who could break hearts without blinking. And suddenly, a terrifying idea appeared. What if Einstein's greatest secret wasn't in physics, but in his own life? Now let me ask you something. If you received a letter from the person you love, and it said, if you want to live with me, you must follow these rules. Not suggestions, rules. Would you call that love? Or would you call it a prison? Because in Einstein's letters, this isn't a metaphor, it's real. And it leads to a marriage that collapsed like a star. But that's only the beginning, because these letters also hint at hidden affairs, emotional distance, in a secret that still haunts historians today. A child who vanished from history. Yes. Many researchers believe Einstein and his first partner had a daughter, a little girl whose name appears briefly and then disappears, like she never existed. So here's the horrifying question. Could the most famous genius in the world have erased his own child from the story? And if that's true, and what happened to her? Was she given away? Did she die? Was she hidden? And why did Einstein never speak of her again? This is why Einstein's private letters matter, because letters don't perform. They don't smile for cameras. They don't protect reputations. Letters reveal the person when nobody's watching. So in this video, we won't look at Einstein the icon. We'll look at Einstein the man, the voice in the paper, the truth between the lines, because sometimes the thing that destroys a legend isn't a mistake in science. It's the evidence of their own words. So stay with me, because once we open these letters, you'll never see Einstein the same way again. Albert Einstein's first great love wasn't just a romance, it was a partnership. Her name was Mileva Maric, a brilliant Serbian physicist, one of the very few women allowed into the elite scientific world of Europe at the time. At the end of the 1890s, Einstein and Mileva met as students at the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich. They weren't typical lovers. They spoke the language of equations. They argued over physics. They dreamed of discovering the truth of the universe together. And in their early letters, Einstein's tone is almost tender. He writes like a man who has finally found someone who understands him, someone who sees beyond his awkwardness, someone who can match his mind. For a moment, it looked like they were building the future side by side. But then, something changed. Einstein's career began rising fast, and Mileva's world began shrinking. Their relationship moved from equality to imbalance, from two minds together to one mind becoming a legend. By the early 1900s, Mileva was carrying the weight of motherhood, responsibilities, and emotional strain, while Einstein was obsessively focused on work. The tension didn't explode at once. It built slowly, like pressure inside a sealed room. And the breaking point came when Einstein's private letters revealed something chilling. Not a love confession, not a desperate apology, a list of rules. Rules that Mileva was expected to follow if she wanted the marriage to survive. And these weren't normal household agreements. They read like commands. Einstein demanded that Mileva keep his clothes in order, bring meals to his room, leave him alone when he wanted silence, stop speaking to him unless necessary, abandon emotional expectations. In other words, the woman who once stood beside him as an intellectual equal was being reduced to a servant in her own home. And when you read it, you feel something uncomfortable. This isn't a marriage anymore. It's control. It's coldness. It's power. And here's the tragic irony. Einstein could understand the deepest laws of space and time, but he couldn't understand the simplest law of love. You can't treat a heart like a machine. Mileva endured as long as she could, but the distance between them was no longer emotional. It was physical. Einstein spent more time away, more time writing, more time being celebrated by the world, while Mileva was quietly disappearing. And then came the final fracture. Einstein grew closer to Elsa, his cousin, a relationship that Mileva could no longer ignore. At that point, the marriage wasn't wounded, it was dying. By 1919, they divorced, and what happened next feels almost like a cruel transaction. Einstein agreed to give Mileva something enormous in exchange for divorce, the future money from the Nobel Prize. And years later, he did win it. But by then, Mileva wasn't his partner. She was a shadow of the life they had imagined. She stayed with their children. She struggled financially and emotionally, and she watched the world worship the man she once knew intimately, while her own name faded into silence. This is the part of Einstein's story most people never want to face. The legend was built in public, but it left wreckage in private. And if you listen carefully, Mileva's story isn't just about a broken marriage. It's about a truth the world keeps repeating. Sometimes history celebrates the genius and forgets the person who paid the price. Albert Einstein didn't become famous slowly. He exploded into history. At the beginning of the 20th century, Europe was obsessed with progress, new machines, new cities, new power. But science still felt like a locked door. Most people believed the universe was already understood, until one quiet man shattered that illusion. Einstein was not a professor at a grand university. He wasn't born into power. He wasn't surrounded by rich patrons. He was a clerk, a man sitting in a small office at the Swiss Patent Office, reading inventions, checking papers, stamping documents. And yet, in his mind, he was playing with the universe itself. By 1905, something unbelievable happened. In one single year, Einstein published papers that would change the course of humanity. He explained the photoelectric effect, the foundation of modern technology. He proved the reality of atoms. He introduced special relativity, and he wrote the equation that would become famous even among children: E equals mc squared. To scientists, this wasn't just intelligence. It was impossible. It was like watching a human being rewrite the rules of nature. And soon the world began to whisper his name as if it were magic. Einstein. Einstein. The genius who bent time. The man who changed reality. Then came the moment that turned him into a global icon. In 1919, during a solar eclipse, scientists tested Einstein's prediction that gravity could bend light. And when the results confirmed it, the news exploded across newspapers. Headlines screamed that Newton was defeated, that the universe had changed, and at the center of it all, Albert Einstein. Overnight, he wasn't just famous, he was worshipped. Crowds gathered just to see him. Students treated him like a prophet. Journalists chased him through streets. People begged for his attention, his words, his approval. He became something rare, not only the most brilliant scientist alive, but the symbol of human intelligence, a living miracle. And the letters started arriving, thousands of them, from strangers, from admirers, from people desperate for answers. Some asked him about time travel, some asked him about death, some asked him about God. Because in the public imagination, Einstein wasn't a man anymore. He was the mind of the universe. But here's the twist. The more the world celebrated him, the more he began to disappear behind the legend. Because genius can make you famous, but fame can make you lonely. And while the world saw a miracle walking among them, Einstein's private life was beginning to crack. The miracle had shadows, and soon his letters would reveal them. When people imagine Albert Einstein, they imagine a man beyond emotion, a mind too busy for love. But Einstein's private letters tell a different story, a story not of pure devotion, but of complicated desire, secrecy, and a love that came at a cost. Because after his marriage with Mileva, March began collapsing, Einstein didn't simply walk away into silence. He moved toward someone else. Her name was Elsa Einstein. And what made it forbidden wasn't just the timing, it was the bloodline. Elsa wasn't a stranger. She was his cousin. In fact, Elsa was related to Einstein in a way that sounded almost unbelievable, even for that era. A close family connection, yet she became the woman who would replace Mileva. And it didn't happen overnight. At first, the relationship looked innocent. Letters, visits, comfort. Einstein was under pressure. Fame, physics, politics, war. And Elsa became something Mileva could no longer be in his eyes. A calm refuge. Someone who didn't challenge him intellectually, but supported him emotionally. But here's where the story turns darker. Because in Einstein's private correspondence, Elsa appears not just as a new love, but as a door into a life where Einstein could escape responsibility. And while Mileva struggled with children and loneliness, Einstein was building a new future, quietly. By 1912, Einstein's emotional bond with Elsa was strong enough that it could no longer be hidden. He wrote her with intimacy, with tenderness, sometimes even with excitement, like a man becoming young again. And then came the ultimate betrayal. Einstein began spending more and more time away from home, more time with Elsa, more time in another life, less time with the woman who had once been his partner in science and the mother of his children. To make it worse, Einstein and Elsa's relationship was not just romantic, it became official. In 1919, after Einstein and Mileva finally divorced, Einstein married Elsa, and the world applauded it as if it were a happy ending. But for many historians, it wasn't a happy ending. It was the final proof that Einstein had emotionally left Mileva long before he legally left her. And now here comes the part most people never expect. Even after marrying Elsa, Einstein did not become a perfect husband. The letters suggest that Einstein's heart was restless, that his fame opened doors, especially with women who admired him. And in private, Einstein sometimes behaved like a man who believed the rules of ordinary morality didn't apply to him. It's uncomfortable, but it's important, because Elsa didn't marry a simple man. She married a living legend, a man the world worshipped. And legends often demand freedom, even when it destroys others. Elsa became his public partner, the woman beside the genius. But inside the letters, you can feel a deeper truth. Einstein did not want to belong to anyone. Not fully, not completely. And so Elsa's love story is not just romantic, it's tragic, because it reveals something about Einstein that history rarely admits. The man who could control the universe with equations couldn't control his own hunger for escape. And maybe that's why this chapter matters, because it forces us to ask one dangerous question. Was Elsa the love of Einstein's life, or simply the safest place he could hide when his first life collapsed? As we reach the end of this story, there's one question that always follows Albert Einstein like a shadow. Was he a gentle genius or a difficult man to live with? Because the truth is, Einstein wasn't a simple hero. He wasn't a perfect saint of science. He was something more human. And maybe that's what makes him so fascinating. The myth versus the man. We all know the myth. The wild hair, the playful smile, the man who rewrote the universe with a few pages of equations, a dream figure, the face of pure intelligence. But behind that image was a person, a man who could be warm, funny, and humble, and at the same time, emotionally distant, stubborn, and painfully complicated. Einstein was full of contradictions, and those contradictions weren't accidental. They were part of what made him Einstein. The genius side, why people loved him. Let's begin with why people admired him beyond science. Einstein had something rare, a childlike curiosity. Even as an adult, he never stopped asking questions that sounded almost naive. What is time? What is space? Why does light behave like that? What is reality? To Einstein, the universe was not just a machine, it was a mystery, and he treated that mystery with wonder. People also loved that he didn't act like a cold professor. He joked, he smiled, he played violin, he spoke in simple metaphors. Even his famous quotes show this side. He believed imagination mattered more than memorizing. He believed curiosity was sacred, and in a world that often worshipped authority, Einstein had the courage to say, "No, I don't accept this until it makes sense." That's the heart of genius. Not just intelligence, but the refusal to stop questioning. But then, the difficult side appears. However, if you look closer, another picture appears. Einstein wasn't always easy, not even close. In personal life, he could be emotionally absent, even cold. Not because he hated people, but because he lived in his head. Sometimes it felt like he was physically present, but mentally in another universe. And that distance didn't just affect strangers. It affected the people closest to him, his family, his wives, his children. Einstein's mind could hold galaxies, but emotions, relationships, those were far more complicated for him. And sometimes, he didn't handle them well. The cost of living like a mind. There's something tragic here, because Einstein may have understood the universe better than anyone alive. But he didn't always understand how to navigate ordinary human closeness. He could be charming in public and difficult in private. He could speak about peace and humanity and still fail to give warmth to those who needed it. Why? Because his life was dominated by obsession. Not obsession in a romantic way. Obsession in the way fire dominates a room. Einstein wasn't a man who worked 9 to 5. His brain never clocked out. He carried problems with him like burdens, during walks, meals, conversations, nights. And when a person lives like that, they don't just become productive, they become intense. And intensity in relationships often becomes pain. Was that wrong or simply human? Here's where the story becomes uncomfortable, because it's easy to judge, easy to say, he should have been better, he should have been kinder, he should have been more present. But the harder truth is, Einstein was not just a genius. He was a human being built differently, not superior, but different. And that difference came with a cost. Genius is not a magical gift with no downside. It often comes with isolation, impatience with normal routines, emotional blindness to everyday needs, and overwhelming hunger to pursue the unknown. Einstein wasn't trying to be cruel, but he wasn't always capable of being normal. And this is the part history doesn't like to admit, because we prefer our geniuses clean and perfect. But real genius is messy, a man who changed the world, but couldn't escape himself. The irony is incredible. Einstein changed the way we understand time itself, but he couldn't always give time to the people who loved him. He explained relativity, yet sometimes failed in the simplest kind of connection, human closeness. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson. Not that Einstein was a monster, not that Einstein was a saint, but that even the brightest mind on earth can still struggle with ordinary humanity. So, was he a difficult man? Yes. Sometimes, he could be stubborn, he could be detached, he could be self-centered, he could be emotionally distant. But he also wasn't fake. He didn't pretend to be someone he wasn't. He stayed true to his inner nature, even when it made life harder. And there's something strangely honest about that, because people like Einstein don't fit into normal life easily. They don't belong fully to the world. They belong partly to something else, to thought, to imagination, to questions that keep others awake at night. The final truth. So when we ask Einstein, genius or difficult man, the answer is, he was both. And that's why his story still lives, because it reminds us that greatness is not pure. It's complicated. It carries shadows. And the most brilliant people are still capable of hurting others, not through evil, but through limitation. Ending message, strong outro. Einstein once said something that feels like the perfect ending to this story. Not about science, but about being human. He believed that a life has value only if it helps others. And maybe that's the challenge he left behind. Not just equations, not just theories, but a reminder. You can be brilliant and still have blind spots. You can change the universe and still struggle with yourself. And perhaps that is what makes Einstein unforgettable. Not because he was perfect, but because he was real.